What's up guys, Eddie Mikes here. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the pitch deck that I built to raise money for my last software business called Chowtime. Chowtime was a dine-in mobile ordering and payments software platform for restaurants in Hong Kong. And I built this deck from scratch, a blank PowerPoint file. And when we sent it out to investors, we received a huge amount of positive feedback. And I think within 2 weeks of sending out the very first PDF attachment, we had $200,000 US of funding interest on the table. So the principles I used to build this deck work. I still use them. You can apply them to your business and if you're raising capital, and I will link to my website where you can download this presentation if you want to go through it in a little bit more detail in the description below. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick page flip here, going slide by slide, talking about why the narrative on each page works. And in some cases, I'll even call out some stuff that I might do differently today based on how my thinking has evolved since building this business. So without further ado, let's get going. All right, so on this first slide here, and we use the first couple slides to talk about the problem and set some context, I want to call out a theme that you will see recurring in this deck and in every deck that I do. I say things very directly in plain 3rd or 4th grade English. And the reason for that is investors do not have time to work to understand what you're trying to tell them. They're facing a huge stack of decks to get through every month, and they're flipping through them very, very quickly. And if you don't concisely communicate to them only the pertinent information, you're just going to lose interest and people are going to ghost you and not follow up. But, I see too many people making the mistake of trying to seem smarter than they are by writing fancy convoluted language because they think it makes them seem smart, but it's actually just like a total buzzkill and unfortunately a barometer for competence these days. If you can't think through your business clearly enough to communicate it concisely, it's like a big red flag. Like why would I or an investor even bother thinking about investing in you? Okay, so that's just something a piece of context I want to set up front. Now, we open by establishing some credibility. We have been operating restaurants in our target market for a long time. We've identified a specific operational process within our target market that has a high-level problem. All right, it does not take an idiot an idiot could understand the context we're trying to set here. It doesn't take a genius to understand what we're trying to say. We've established credibility, we've narrowed down what part of our target market we're talking about, and we've identified a high-level problem. All right, now I'm primed to consume what comes on the next slide. Again, another slide with an extremely direct problem statement. There are too many manual processes. We know that we're talking about ordering and payments because we mentioned it up here. And what I like about this slide format, I've seen this in a lot of other slides, is that it's super relatable. You've been in a restaurant, you've thought these things, and you know how it can erode the quality of your experience and make operations at a restaurant way, way less efficient. Okay? It's very relatable, does not take more than like 2 or 3 seconds to understand what we're trying to say here. That positions us to arrive at the impact slide. So a lot of people make this mistake, and it's really frustrating to see. You cannot talk about a problem without talking about the impact of the problem, which in this case is lost revenue, which is a compelling impact because people will pay money for things that allow them to make more money, right? That's just like a common B2B value proposition, okay? So I cannot just open the slide, I cannot just open the presentation with this slide where I say, restaurants are losing revenue because there's inefficient operations and poor guest experience. Like what? Like I have no context for what any of this means. So you need to spend a little bit of time very concisely contextualizing your problem. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make when building out their presentations. We could have tried to cram all of this stuff into one slide, but it would have just been overwhelming, harder for the reader to digest, and it's just much smoother and easier to get through when you break it up into these bite-sized bits. And you'll see me talk about in some of my content, I have a 9-slide framework that I use to build out presentations, and it's not really a 9-slide framework, it's a 9-component framework. The problem statement is the first component, but if you need to take more than one slide to articulate your problem and set the context effectively, you should do it. Right? People are like, oh, your deck needs to be like 7 or 8 slides, or, like it's too long and you don't know how to communicate your business concisely. Like, no, you can use more slides as long as they're structured in a way that's easy to get through. This is one statement, which leads to this statement, which leads me to understand this statement much more clearly than if I attempted to explain this problem impact on its own. Moving on. All right, so this is a slide that is specific to our business, right? If you took any vanilla business, you would just go, here's the problem, here's the solution. We have a big market and we have a lot of traction, and then talk about some other stuff that investors want to see. Unfortunately, having a vanilla business is the exception, not the rule. So oftentimes you will need to take a little bit more airtime to add some context that's specific to your business. And in this case, the restaurant tech space is a very, very crowded one, okay? And there are a zillion tech solutions. And we found that when we're talking to customers or investors about the problem we were trying to solve, a lot of people erroneously conflated what we were trying to do with a lot of other tech solutions that were sold into restaurants, but that weren't competitive solutions, okay? And we built out this slide to set that context up front. Okay, so the point of this slide is as follows. We're an ordering and payments business for Asia F&B, restaurants and bars. And there are basically 3 sections of the restaurant business where technology solves problems. The point of sale, so when the waiter or the waitress enters in your order and the order gets sent to the kitchen, and everything behind that is called back of house. So inventory, supply chain management, kitchen ticket printing, all kinds of stuff like that is POS and back of house. And there's a huge technology universe around that. Then you go to the very, very front of the business, the customer-facing side of the business, before anyone enters into the venue, and you have anything related to customer acquisition. So that could be delivery platforms, discovery like marketplaces for food, reservation booking platforms, et cetera, et cetera. Grab, Deliveroo, Uber Eats, these types of businesses, okay? Once you step into the venue, customer acquisition doesn't really touch the restaurant business anymore, right? Or any of the processes within a given restaurant. Neither does POS and back of house. It's just kind of this manual no man's land where waiters and the staff and waitresses are interacting with guests, as they should, but there are a lot of inefficiencies around the placing of orders and the collecting of payments, particularly in the Asian market. And we're setting that context with this slide up front, saying, forget about all this crowded tech over here and all this crowded tech over here. There is a gap that is underserved, and that is what our business is focusing on. Moving on. Another slide that is specific to our business and that doesn't necessarily need to be placed here. The only reason we included this slide that talks about differentiation up front is because we face that objection a lot. In most cases, I think anything related to competition and differentiation can be addressed in the appendix or later in your presentation and isn't pertinent to the core narrative. But ordering and payments, particularly globally, is a crowded space in other developed markets, which I'll talk about later. And as I mentioned on this slide, there's a ton of competition in F&B tech in other areas of the restaurant ecosystem, in the back of house and in the customer acquisition before anyone enters into the venue. With that in mind, we received a lot of objections about, presumably people know this gap exists. I've seen other similar products that are trying to address this problem, blah, blah, blah. We included this slide to immediately handle that objection up front because we knew that we would face it. The point is that existing solutions don't work. Again, plain direct English, they don't work. That's all you need to know. And here's why. They don't support payments. They don't have point of sale integrations, which I'll talk about later. The apps are generally bad, right? This is not a huge differentiator because presumably someone can wake up and have a competitive quality application within a year's time. But as it stands right now, their apps are bad and none of them are built to scale, to support big multi-unit brands and institutions. So we just want to hammer home the point here that there is this gap. Everyone's focused on customer acquisition and back of house, and there's this gap that's been underserved in Asia, and Asia is early on the adoption curve of dine-in, ordering and payments technology relative to the rest of the world. One other thing that I want to say before getting into the solution stuff. So this is the 6th slide in the deck. Prevailing wisdom, which I preach a lot too, is that you should just hammer through your problem and solution quickly. In most cases, that very much is the case, and that's what you should do. But the more objections that you have to handle up front, assuming you're building a business that should be built, the more acceptable it is to build out a step-by-step narrative talking people through the problem and solution. We could have attempted to say, we have a lot of experience, ordering and payments sucks because of this, and people lose revenue, and there's this gap because all the tech companies are focused on other stuff, and here's why the gap exists. We could have attempted to build out that introductory narrative in 1 or maybe 2 slides, but it just wouldn't have been as compelling. All of a sudden, we would have a ton of text on the page, and it would have been Jesus Christ, how do I read through all this stuff? It's okay to have a bunch of slides if they're built for the reader to motor through them. Like bang, all right, I know what you're talking about. It reads like a book. Bang, it reads like a book. An idiot could understand what we're talking about here. It reads like a book. Boom, this slide is a little bit more dense, but we've set some context that allows people to digest what we're saying here, and we've taken an entire slide to do it as opposed to cramming it into another slide with other content, and then bang, another very, very concise slide. What's up, guys? If you're enjoying this video and you want me to roast your deck using the same principles I use to raise over $30 million for my own businesses and my clients' businesses, click the link below, send me your deck, and prepare to get roasted. Alrighty, back to the video. Getting into the solution section here, we have some direct solution slides here, which I'll talk about in a minute. This slide here, I ended up including just because I felt it made the page flip a bit smoother. You don't necessarily need slides like this. This slide, I can tell you, is not the reason someone didn't follow up with us, right? So it's kind of harmless to include. I just felt that it kind of buttered up the narrative, so to speak, between all this problem stuff and getting into like, here's our solution, you know, just like a pre-solution introductory slide. If you're really keen on reducing like the slide count of your presentation, you don't need to include a slide like this. I just happen to think that in my case, it kind of smoothed out the narrative a little bit. All right, so the solution slides. Oftentimes, there's a lot to say about your solution, right? Your product. Instead of coming at it from an angle of, how do I say everything about my product? You more want to come at it from the angle of, what questions do people want answers to about my product? What is it? What does it do / how does it work? How does it solve the problem / what is the value proposition? Okay, I know there's 4 different questions, but those are generally the things that people want to know. Explain very, very concisely how it solves the problem. So here we have 2 product modes. We had a product mode where guests could scan a QR code, get a menu, place their order, and pay for it, then get their food. And we had another one where they could enter the restaurant, order through the wait staff, have their entire meal, and scan a QR code at the end of their meal, receive a digital receipt like you see here, and pay it through their phone and leave. And again, it does not take a genius to understand exactly how this works. You scan a QR code, you place your order, and you pay. And if there's any more detail that you want to include, a very effective way to do that is to just have a video demo that people can link to. You don't need to force the video demo upon people, but you can just sneak it in here, right? So if I click on this video demo, you can just see this video of the solution working. There's no ambiguity about how it works. It's just a menu app where someone can place their order and pay. Same thing for this pay at table solution. In really plain English, guest scans QR code on their table, guest pays bill in 10 seconds, guest leaves venue, merchant welcomes next guest. It's very, very clear what's happening, and it also is very, very clear what the value proposition is. They pay fast, and you can turn tables over faster. And I've kind of hammered that point home here and connected how the product works with the problem statement that I articulated earlier. How it's like, can I get the check, please? Sorry, we don't split bills. Those are 2 problems that are like very visceral that people have experienced, likely the reader has experienced. And by explaining how this product works, it's very obvious how that problem is solved by this solution. Enough said there. There's unlimited things you can say on your solution, but try to keep it as concise as possible to explain what it is, how it works, and how it connects to solving your problem. Moving on. Another little trick I like to do, including like a quick slide in here that shows a bunch of the UI screens, is kind of a sneaky way to just get in more credibility around your product. If you already have a product built or at least designed, you can just take a bunch of UI screens, turn them on an angle, add some drop shadow to each image, separate them out from each other, throw them on a slide, and you have like a good looking slide. This took me like 20 minutes to put together or something. So I'm not gonna spend too much time here, but like no one's gonna fault you for having this here. And it's like an easy way to get more context about your product in the deck without overwhelming the reader. All right, value proposition. First of all, a lot of people don't even include value propositions, which is like a complete mistake. You need to quantify how your solution is solving your problem for your customer. To take it one step further, if people do include their value proposition, people will build out slides that just have these types of bullets on them, which are okay to include, but these types of bullets alone are not okay. Seamless bill splitting, happier staff, better guest experience. That all may be true, but can you quantify how the customer's life is being made better by implementing your solution? And in our case, we had data to support it, right? We went out, we like built a product, implemented it in a couple of pilot customers, got data back, and now look, we were able to put together a much more compelling slide, which is how you should run any business before you fundraise. But here, we noticed that we saved like 10 to 15 minutes per table, right? That increased table turns. We noticed that compared to the orders that were placed off our app versus on our app, orders on our app had 20% higher average spend. And because we had a tipping function that just allowed someone to click a button to tip, like you would on like Amazon or Uber Eats or whatever, there were 40% more tips for merchants as well, which is compelling because that makes it easier to retain staff. So if we were not able to include these numbers in the deck, again, very, very concisely, just a couple numbers and a couple words, everything we're saying prior to this would just be like more words on a page. And the same goes for traction, which I'll talk about in a minute. You must quantify your value proposition, or else it's just BS. Like, why would I believe you? It's just words on a page, and there's like too many other decks that you're competing against that have done the work to quantify their value proposition. Put it on a slide in your deck. All right, so the market slide. There are a couple things that I would do differently on this slide if I rebuilt this deck today. So whenever you size a market, it should be from the bottom up. And that means you calculate the number of addressable customers in your market, how much you can charge each of them per year, and you multiply those two numbers together. That's it. And that calculation represents the constraint on how much revenue your company can generate, which for all intents and purposes is your market size, your TAM. What is not your market size is top-down market sizing, which I see 9 out of 10 decks do, where they say an existing industry is X big. There's already X dollars of revenue being transacted in this industry, and if we capture Y market share, we will be Z big. That actually has nothing to do with how big your company can be. You might create new market share. Your assumptions around how much market share you can capture could be wildly off. It's not based in any validatable assumptions, whereas if you say, okay, here's a fact, there are X number of customers in our market. Here's another fact. Our business model is Y. And if we're right about those two things and we capture 100% market share, which of course you're not, you're just trying to define the maximum constraint of how big your company can be. If we do those two things, X times Y equals Z, that is how big our company can be, and that is our TAM, our market size. Unfortunately, for our business, which is a payments processing business where our revenue is a commission percentage that we earn on the payments that we process through our application, we're kind of limited in our ability to do a bottom-up market sizing. There's $13 billion being transacted every year in Hong Kong's restaurant market. If we captured 100% of that, our revenue would be that number times our commission percentage. So obviously, we're not going to capture 100% of this market, but in this case, because we are a payments processing business and we're not like a traditional SaaS model where we're charging a subscription fee, we kind of have to say how much a market is already transacting. So we're kind of limited in that regard. I know I preach the bottom-up market sizing from the mountaintops, and I stand by that. If I were building a traditional SaaS model, I would present my market that way. But if you are doing like a marketplace business or anything that is like a transaction commission based business, you kind of have to quote how much revenue is already being transacted in the market you want to penetrate. So in Hong Kong, it was 13 billion. And in all of Southeast Asia, it was 60 billion. There are a ton of venues and a ton of people. We're just throwing all these stats on the page about how big the market is. I think only some of that is necessary. I would get rid of this vision thing, like nobody cares, it's grandiose. People say you gotta have the grand vision. No, just tell me how the business is gonna be really big. I would kill this. I think the number of people in the market is not relevant, and the number of venues in the market is not relevant, and I would put two numbers on here. There is 13 billion GMV in Hong Kong up for grabs, and there is 60 billion GMV up for grabs in Southeast Asia. End of story. And I would also put somewhere else on here, I would allude to the fact that we are a transaction commission business model. Without that context, these numbers don't have that much meaning. So I would have done that even though we get to it in more detail later. And then I do like this very direct copy about like, why this market? I'm an idiot. I can still understand this. It's big. It's underserved. There's no competitors. And we have demonstrated traction in our launch market. The takeaway is bottom-up market sizing and have a validatable calculation in big numbers on the page. Don't tell me how big an industry already is. That has nothing to do with how big your company can be. Size your market based on your company in a vacuum and how many customers are available to you. Moving on. Okay, everything we've said in this deck so far is just BS, words on a page, until you can demonstrate that customers in your market are taking action with your product. Traction. Everything else we say here is just nonsense until we demonstrate that it's actually in the market and that it's real. So again, the theme that keeps rearing its beautiful head. Very, very concise, direct language. Here's the transaction we've generated in our target market. 3 stats. Bang, bang, bang. And the takeaway is we have demonstrated proof of concept. No one can read this deck, get on a call with us and be like, oh, well, we'd feel more comfortable investing with you if we've seen a little bit of proof of concept. It's like, did you read slide 14 or slide 13? You should not be approaching the market unless you have some demonstrable traction, and communicate your traction very, very early in the presentation, because everything you say in the deck until they see traction is just words on the page. Now, that statement may lead you to believe that the traction slide should be the first slide in your deck. The reason that shouldn't be the case is that the traction slide has no context until you contextualize your problem and your solution. The structure is, here's a problem we're trying to solve. Here's the solution, why it works and what the value proposition is. There's a huge amount of people who have this problem and need this solution, this big market. And by the way, we've already started penetrating this market and have a lot of compelling traction that's validating everything I've just said to you. That is how you should open a compelling presentation. Now, depending on the nature of your traction, it may behoove you to include more than one slide, as opposed to just like, bang, here's our traction, up into the right chart of what we've accomplished. If you can do that, do it. In our case, it was the most compelling way to present traction was these individual stats and then to show our pipeline. The reason that this pipeline is compelling is because we got customers, big restaurant groups, to sign LOIs that they would partner with us and pilot our product. Again, another representation of people in the market taking action with our product. Not words on a page. This is something that someone else did, something that someone else is saying, not things that I'm claiming that you just need to take on a leap of faith. The traction we've generated is going to accelerate because we've already onboarded these restaurant groups that have a number of restaurants and bars. And if we are able to successfully deploy our product across all of these restaurant groups, that represents a GMV opportunity of 50 million US dollars, which is like a ton of money. Obviously, we need way more than that to be a big sustainable business and ultimately like get a liquidity event, but it's a ton of traction that we've already kind of signed up. So the punchline is here, any action that your customers have taken in response to your product should be illustrated and communicated in your presentation. Here's what we've accomplished, the payments we've processed, here's the deals that we've signed, and this is what these deals represent. Again, extremely direct, third grade level language. So I really like this slide. This was super compelling. It gave us a lot of credibility when we sent out this deck. Okay, team slide. You got to include a team slide before you ask for money. I don't think it's that important. I think people care about more about the business. And if your business sounds like a good one, you're demonstrating traction, then they will meet you and decide whether to invest in you, the entrepreneur. But if you can communicate why your team very concisely is uniquely positioned to build this business, you should do it. And we had a hospitality veteran in Hong Kong who's on our team, who's able to get us penetration into the market very, very quickly. And we just called that out here. Beyond that, unless you have some like super amazing places that you worked at that are relevant to your business, just motor through your team slide very quickly. Don't put like a big wall of text about how awesome you are. No one cares. No one's going to read it. Another very basic text slide. We faced a lot of objection about how crowded the market was and that there are a lot of other like crappy solutions already in place. So most businesses won't need to include a slide like this. We included this here to hammer home the point. Okay, here's our team and here's why we're positioned to win. And these are things that are both differentiated and defensible. We're differentiated because we have an experienced team with local industry access. No one can just replicate that. We're POS agnostic. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. We're laser focused on dine-in, where a lot of other platforms that may be touching dine-in are focused on other areas of the F&B operational stack. We've integrated payments. This is differentiated. Looking back, it's not super defensible. If someone wanted to wake up and integrate payments inside a year's time, they probably could. And another thing that I probably wouldn't include going forward is any claims about your UI making you differentiated. I think it was a mistake to include this because even though we had a better UI than everyone else, that's differentiated, but it's not super defensible because if a competitor sees that you're taking market share on the merit of your strong UI, they can wake up and have a competitive UI inside a year as well. So it's not super defensible. Finally, all of this stuff is backed up by data that we've generated in the market. Competing solutions that we're trying to differentiate against, when they were implemented in venues, the percentage of orders that customers placed through those apps was 5% only of the total number of orders, the total value of orders that restaurant processed in a given day or a given month. If a restaurant served 100 orders a day, only 5 of them went through the competing apps in the venues in which those apps were deployed. In our venues where we deployed our apps, up to 85% of orders went through our app. So it was just a really compelling piece of data about what we were doing differently, why our solution was compelling, and gave credibility to everything that we're claiming. The more you can back stuff up with quantifiable data, the better. I cannot emphasize that enough. Moving on. All right, business model. I cannot emphasize this enough. Explain to your investors how you make money in extremely direct, plain English. It's shocking to me how many decks I read where I'm like, but like, how do they charge customers? What's their model? Absurd questions for investors to have to ask. And if they have to ask it, you're going to fall down a peg in their assessment of your competence and investability as a founder. So here we go. Plain English, how we make money. We are a payments processing business, 1% take rate. If there's nothing else on the slide, these logos, this call out at the bottom, it's already enough, right? Like there's no question about how we make money on a slide like this. And if you have a SaaS business, you can show your pricing tiers on a slide just like you have your pricing page on your website. Just be direct and tell people how you make money. Don't be cagey or mysterious about it. It will benefit you and you will see a higher positive reply rate from investors if you do that and you have a compelling business. The reason we added this is some shrewd investors who understood the payments business challenged our margin profile, and they said that 1% is not a huge margin. How are you going to generate cash to finance growth? And the answer to that was onboarding as many initial venues as possible such that we could access volume-based discounts from our payments processor and expand our margin as we grow. I will say, as a quick digression, that ended up not working. If you are in a business that does not have enough profitability to begin with, this idea of your margin expanding as you scale is like a far-flung pipe dream that's never going to happen. You need enough margin to generate cash and profitability and cash at the get-go such that you can reach scale. And if your margin continues to expand on top of that, that's just gravy. But this notion that you're a compelling model because your margin will expand your margin will expand to an acceptable level if you grow is BS. It will never happen because you won't grow because you don't have enough, you're not generating enough cash initially. It's just this chicken egg situation. So I will leave that there and continue through the presentation. All right, the ask slide, another slide where it pays to be painfully direct. Just tell people you're raising X to do Y. We're raising $500K to execute in our contracted pipeline. And this resonates because we already walked through the list of customers who signed LOIs to partner with us and do a pilot partnership. List out your high-level capital allocation categories, and if possible, list out a few specific things that you believe are like ultra high priority in the near term, and be prepared to talk about how that will help unlock growth. You don't need to explain why it will on the page. That's too much text, but talk about these things such that you have something to discuss with investors when you get on the phone with them. What I would do is either have the capital allocation categories add up to a number that's less than the amount you're raising, or have it add up to $500K and include like a buffer as like a fifth line item here, just to show investors that you're raising a little bit more than you need, shows them you're being conservative, and shows them that this business can still get off the ground and you can grow and complete the raise, even if you're not able to get the full ask, which in our case was $500K. In reality, we needed like $100K. So we're like, it'd be nice to have 250. So why don't we just double it, right? Like that's kind of how we thought through it. There wasn't much more rocket science beyond that. Next thing is that I see a lot of decks where the ask slide puts terms on the page. Don't do that. The reason is there's no upside to putting terms on the page, and there is some downside. The downside is that let's say someone's flipping through your deck and they're kind of on the fence about following up with you. They're like, interesting business. I don't know if I have time. Maybe I want to talk to these guys. Like they're literally on the fence, and they get to the ask slide and they see some terms that just hits them the wrong way or rubs them the wrong way. And they're just like, I don't have time to negotiate a $5 million pre-seed valuation. Like I'm only comfortable investing at $3 million. There is a cohort of investors who will be on the fence about whether or not they follow up with you, get to the ask slide, see terms, are turned off, and immediately put you in the pass pile. Whereas if you had left those terms out, at least some of those investors would follow up with you, and it's possible that one of those investors that followed up with you that would have otherwise not followed up with you if you had terms in the deck is someone that would ultimately get through your process and write you a check. So it's just not in your interest to put terms in the deck. And then benefit of leaving terms out of the deck, some upside, is that When you get them on the phone with you, you can control the narrative and the delivery around valuation, massage it in real time, listen to their feedback, show that you're willing to negotiate, and hold their hand through the process, through the narrative around your valuation and how you're hoping to get the deal done, as opposed to just like allowing them to ignore you cold because they see a number they don't like in your deck. Okay, so now you have this appendix slide. Including an appendix is a very cheeky way to get more information you want to communicate about your business into your deck without overwhelming investors. Everything ahead of the appendix should just be the core components of your narrative. Everything else should be in the back of the deck. And the core narrative of your business is as follows: your problem, your solution, how big your market is, your traction, your business model, how you're going to distribute your product to customers, your distribution and go-to-market plan, and your team and your ask. Everything other than that is secondary to those core elements of your pitch. And if you pitch your business that way, your deck will be optimized to grab people's attention and get a follow-up meeting. The deck is not designed to raise capital, put money in your bank account. A lot of people make the mistake of building a deck with that goal in mind, and it's totally under-optimized and does not get as much of a positive reply as you need to build a good top of funnel with investors and increase your chances of ultimately raising capital. So if you build the deck with the goal of getting a follow-up meeting in mind, the copy you write and the narrative you construct will be a lot more direct and concise around the core components that matter, which I just walked through. Okay, so something that I would do differently in this deck, which is missing here, is I need a slide in the main core narrative about how we're going to acquire more merchants, more restaurants. And this is decent. These are 3 things that will unlock new restaurants to be onboarded onto our platform. But what we don't talk about here is actually how we're going to acquire them. Like, are we going to events? What's our go-to-market strategy? What marketing channels are we pursuing? Now, just very briefly walking through this, in order to onboard a restaurant, we need to integrate with our point of sale system, meaning when someone places an order on our app, the order is sent to their point of sale system automatically, and a ticket is automatically printed in the kitchen. The alternative is for the order to be sent to like a dashboard that we give the waitstaff, and they have to look at the order and manually key it into their point of sale system, which generates a ticket. If it's not obvious, that would actually introduce more friction and operational inefficiency than drive operational efficiency and would completely blow up the entire business model. So having point of sale integrations where our orders automatically were input into their point of sale was an absolute minimum viable feature. So we had a point of sale integration, and that's how we got our initial customers. The point I want to make on this slide is that the point of sale landscape across restaurants in Hong Kong and Asia, and the world for that matter, is very fragmented, meaning there are a lot of point of sale solutions out there which each require unique integrations unto themselves. Let's say there's two restaurant groups, and they use 2 different point of sale systems, and they each have 10 venues. If we integrate with only one of those point of sale systems, we can only onboard 10 venues. Effectively, our addressable market is those 10 venues managed by the restaurant group whose point of sale system we integrate with. To unlock the additional 10 venues by the other restaurant group who has a different point of sale system, we need to build a new point of sale integration with the point of sale system that that restaurant group uses. This is expensive, time intensive, and like a barrier to entry for this market, but it is part of our strategy that we would expand our portfolio of point of sale integrations over time, which would allow us to acquire more customers and unlock more of the market. Okay, that's prong number 1. Prong number 2 is new features, meaning that many restaurants are not similar and require like slight nuances to the use case of our product to be effective in their venue. For example, one venue may just have one menu and one floor where their menu never changes and they can use our product today, but the venue next door may have a different cocktail menu on the outdoor tables versus the food menu that's on the indoor tables. To acquire that customer and deliver full value to their venue, we would need to build a feature that accommodates different menus at the same times. We had done that, and it's a feature that we built, but there are many, many other instances of unique use cases from restaurant to restaurant, and in order to acquire more of those different types of restaurants, different types of customers, we need to build more features. That's prong number 2. And prong number 3 is internationalizing our software to support different currencies, different languages, different payment wallets in different jurisdictions so that we can acquire customers beyond just the Hong Kong market. If we wanted to go to Vietnam, for example, there's a whole swath of changes we would need to make to our software to unlock that market. So these are kind of like the 3 buckets of things that we're working on and investing in to make our addressable market bigger and distribute to more customers and ultimately grow. Moving on. This is just a slide calling out the point of sale integrations. Again, we mentioned it very early in the presentation. This may not be relevant to your business, but if it is, you should say who you're already integrated with. And the key takeaway here is that orders are sent to the point of sale with no disruption to the restaurant operations. So you implement our product, nothing changes except that waiters and waitresses do not have to take order and payment, which saves them a ton of time, and they can focus on delivering hospitality, checking in on customers, delivering food quickly, etc. The biggest takeaway on this slide is that with these integrations, we automatically have access to 800 venues in Hong Kong. Remember this point about building more point of sale systems to acquire more of the market? There's like 17,000 restaurants in Hong Kong. With point of sale integrations that we have today, when we're going to raise money, we already have access to 800 venues, which represents substantial runway for us. All right, so a quick note on competition. For most early stage SaaS businesses, if there is no competition, it's more likely that you have a solution looking for a problem and there is no business to build than it is that you're defining some new industry and category with some like crazy new innovative thing that's never been done before. With that in mind, competition is almost a foregone conclusion, and on balance, it's unless you have like a totally commoditized product, in which case you shouldn't be building the business, the existence of competition, if anything, is like a very small net positive, meaning that there is a problem to solve in the market and maybe you have a way to differentiate yourself and take market share, okay? And that companies are already trying to solve this problem and you're kind of swimming around the right space. There's very, very few things that don't have competitors, especially in the early stage space. So because of that, competition, in my view, is not a part of your core narrative. It's a foregone conclusion, and your core narrative should be talking about your business, your problem, solution, value proposition, why you're unique, and how you're going to be valuable, okay? Competition is secondary to your business. If investors are interested in your business, they are going to do diligence on your market and your competition and come to a conclusion about competition that they would have come to regardless of whether you talked about competition in your deck or not, okay? That's just something to recognize up front. Having said that, it may come off as tone deaf to some investors if you don't address competition at all, particularly if you're in a business that is either hyper-competitive or can be perceived as hyper-competitive. And we were definitely perceived as hyper-competitive, as I illustrated in that earlier slide, where you have a ton of SaaS platforms at the front of house and a ton of SaaS platforms at the back of house. So we didn't include this in our core narrative, but in the appendix, we allocated some time to segmenting out our competition and showing how where we were playing was actually not as competitive as it may seem. There were other people who provided similar solutions to us, like these other F&B tech platforms, these merchant native apps, which we didn't compete with, but no one out there offering a quality, pure play, dine-in, ordering, and payment solution who really specialized in this and only this. And we just included this to pre-handle some objections and really set the context to go deeper into competition in our market when we got on the phone with investors. So I'll leave that here. What you definitely don't want to do is do one of those slides that looks like this. This slide is relevant for the point we're trying to make here, but do not do a competition slide that shows a grid with X's and X's where your column has a bunch of checks and all the competitors' columns have X's and X's. What else are you going to show on a slide like that? It's totally played out. Investors are going to look over it and it makes you blend in with the 9 out of 10 decks that are trying to present their competition that way. Either segment out your market and show why you're different than some of your competitors, or just use plain text to explain how you're differentiated, which I had done numerous times earlier in this presentation. I'm not going to spend too much time on these slides. This is just like backup data on like the POS landscape. This shows that there are a ton of other businesses doing exactly what we're doing and proving out our value proposition in other developed markets like Australia, UK, New Zealand, the US, Europe, France, etc. So I will leave you with this. Focus on your core narrative and write things in plain English. I cannot emphasize that enough. Your core narrative should include your problem, your solution, and maybe your value proposition if you can quantify it, your market, your traction, your business model, your growth or distribution strategy, your team, and your ask. Bang. You need to get through that very, very quickly and concisely, ideally in a narrative that flows smoothly and logically. If you want me to take a look at your deck, I'm happy to record a video review if you send it over. You can reach me through my website in the link below, and on my website you can download this deck if you need some inspiration as well. I hope you guys found this helpful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, and I will see you in the next one.